Hey there YouTube, this is Shua Hendry with another drawing tutorial. Today we're going to be doing 1-point perspective. First thing we'll do is make a horizon line. And for the purposes of this, I'm just putting it in the center of the page. And then we're going to give ourselves a vanishing point, which we'll also put in towards the center of the page. It doesn't have to be perfectly there. Now, one process that is kind of useful is just to go ahead and make a bunch of guidelines, which will all sort of rotate around your vanishing point. Out on the edge, why don't we go ahead and make maybe a fence of some sort. And what I like to do is I like to use my ruler. For instance, this edge of the ruler, I'll line it up with the edge of the page, and if that's pretty parallel, I don't really measure over, but if that's pretty parallel, then I know the line that I make on this side is going to be parallel too. So I'm just going to use two of these lines that I've already created to sort of be my guidelines, and I'm going to draw a fence with some fence posts and some railings going into the distance here along these two guidelines. So the height will always be right along this guideline, and the bottom of all of my posts will kind of follow right along this guideline. Before we get into any of the details of drawing how wide this post is going to be or anything, what I want to do is get my measurement into the distance for each one of these posts, so I'll at least know where they belong in space. Okay, so my first parallel line, I just measured off the edge. My next one is kind of the decision-making one for the distance. However far I decide post number 2 is going to be from post number 1 will determine how far my next post is and my next post all the way into the distance. So really this first one that I make, I just kind of eyeball where I want it to be. Again, I'll use this edge of the ruler to kind of look at this previous vertical line I made for a fence post, and my goal here is just to make it look like it's parallel. And if these two edges, if this edge of the ruler is parallel with that line, then I know when I draw this, that line will be parallel there. Okay, so now the next thing to do, now that I have this initial distance from one fence post to the next, what I want to do is I want to divide that distance in half, and you can do that very simply by making an X in it. And here's your foreshortened midpoint. Okay, so this divides both the height in half and also the distance from fence post 1 to fence post 2 in half. And if you were to look at a square, you could divide it in half, height and width wise, by drawing an X in the middle of your square. It would be the same thing. And since we can't measure in perspective with a ruler the way we could if we had, say, a top-down view or a side view, we can use this geometric breakdown by doing an X to get our midpoint here. So I'm going to draw a bisecting line from the center point. Okay, and that now becomes a very important point for us. Okay, and this line that we just drew back to the vanishing point also is going to be a very important line for us, and I'll try to do my best to explain why. Now that we've created this point, we can actually double the length of this shape, because we can make this the center point of another X. Okay, just like the center point of this X kind of divides this space in half, we can actually multiply this by extending an X into the distance. So if I wanted to double this and create another space over here, then I can start at this point on this edge and make that the center point of an X, and wherever this lands along this guideline here will be where my next fence post should be. Let's do this again. Again, we'll take the bisecting line that we drew from the midpoint of our first 2 fence posts, and where it bisects this third fence post is going to give us a middle section. Okay, and so I'm going to go from fence post number 2 through that bisecting point in fence post number 3, and I'm going to get a point down here. And at this point, I'm not going to worry about making X's every single time. I'm just going to use that point. I'm going to make a parallel line using my ruler, and there's where my next fence post will be. Okay, again, we've got a bisecting point here from this original X that we made. It goes through this fourth fence post, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's our bisection of the fourth fence post. Come back to the top of the third fence post, draw through that bisecting line. Where it hits my guideline along the bottom edge, I get another one. What I do next is I come here and I start to work on the details of maybe my first fence post, and I think I'm going to make this guy round because the top of my fence post is below my eye level line or my horizon line. I can actually see a little bit of the top of it, so I'm going to do an ellipse there. I'm going to pull this line down. That's not the best line, so maybe I'll take my ruler, get a little help there from my friend. And then you can come in, you can start to put in some wood grains or whatever you want to, just to make it look a little more realistic. But what this gives you at this point is the width of your fence post. And if you use the points that you come up with here and run some guidelines back to your vanishing point, that will help you determine the width of your fence post going back into the distance. And so let's say I have one here that drops just a little bit above, below the top. I'll do one sort of in the center, and then come down somewhere around in here. Actually, I want this guy to be up a little bit more because I want this to be off the ground a little bit more. So some of these decisions I'm just making right on the fly. But what that does then is it gives me some points that I can use, and if I take those points and I draw them all back to the vanishing point, then that will help me depict my railing back in space. So I'm gonna kind of dodge the fence posts as I go back until I get to here, and then I can just draw that line through there. Now, I used a ballpoint pen when I was doing this, and the reason why I did that was A, it shows up a little bit better on camera sometimes than graphite, and also because hopefully it gives you an idea that there are different line weights, and if you use a light line weight for your guidelines, you can almost get away without erasing, especially if it's just an idea page, you're just kind of sketching it out. You can always do an overlay. You can always take another sheet of paper, place it on top of this one, and if it's just cheap old typing paper, which is what I'm using right now, you can usually see right through it and just kind of trace over what you had before. You can even do that freehand, and it will look really cool. It will look accurate and perspective. Even in freehand, I can just quickly trace over this, and that I don't mess up my initial drawing, which is nice. I can use it again in case I mess up on this traced part. In addition to that, I can make it look freehanded but with the right perspective, which is kind of a cool looking style because your lines are wavy, but they go right where they're supposed to go. Alright, for those of you who don't know, I am the creator of The Legend of Harapan, and this is the book. So if you get a chance, you can check it out. You can go to thelegendofharapan.com and you can see the first 8 pages for free, and you can also purchase it there. Also, in the upcoming month or so, it will be available on ComiXology, in iTunes, and on Amazon for the Kindle. So make sure you check it out.